So just a bit of an intro. So Colin is he works with me as a friend and a colleague, and he is working currently at AGOF, which is short for Allan Gray Orbis Foundation. Many people just hear Allan Gray and nothing else. So this is not Allan Gray, the investment firm. Allan Gray, the person who's recently tragically died, he actually donated R1 billion to start the foundation. And the foundation has a single purpose, and that purpose is to create or develop entrepreneurs in South Africa. So over 4,000 people, kids, both primary school and students, try to apply for getting into this program. Only about 40 get in, and when they catch them after primary school. And the foundation basically sponsors them, guides them, mentors them, helps them financially, put them in schools that are better suited to that purpose, and they just help those kids along the way. So we are very privileged to actually work there, to do any work there, and it's been great fun. And I think I'm going to hand over to Colin. Maybe Colin, you can share your view of how you got started and with the kinds of things you're busy with, and how that links back to AGOF as a business. So yeah, over to you, Colin.
Thanks, Paul. I like the introduction. If I had given the introduction, I would have just said colleague. But now that you said friend,
next time, you want to be my friend, Colin. You want to be. Just admit it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's keep our focus here, right? Shall we? Yeah. So, thank you all for the opportunity to share. And right at the outset, please let me say, dive in at any point with questions so that we can discuss as we go along. I am really just sharing experience here. Not an expert. I think we all have the experience we have, and so it's a great opportunity to share. And this has been a very, very exciting project for me in that I've learned a lot. I've been in the area of BI for, well, I probably need to build a BI report to work out how long it's been, but it feels like it's been a long time. So this project has been a great opportunity to really use data modeling in the actual process of developing the project and what we're doing. Whereas for me, before, data modeling has always been one of those annoying things that fall under the documentation category that come along at the end of a project that you may or may not do. I won't give any credit here to previous data architects that I worked with. So the data modeling has been a really useful tool. So what I would like to share today is I'm just going to give you a little bit of context on the customer and the system and the data that we're working with and really what we're trying to achieve, and then talk through how we've used data modeling to kind of find our way through the mess. And, it's been a really good learning, because very often before, I've been that guy who sort of dives down into the detail of the data and then kind of works from the bottom up and tries to work out, what to do. And I'm sure we've all been in the situation where the concept of actually detailed and well-articulated business requirements is, it's like the preview of a movie where they showed all the best bits, but when you go watch the movie, you realize it's actually not as great as it looked. So I do have slides and data models and stuff to show you. I don't have it all neatly ordered in a single PowerPoint, so I'm going to jump around a little bit. So please do remember to dive in and comment or ask questions as we go along. So before I actually share my screen on the first picture that I want to show you, I'm just going to give you, Paul basically gave a little bit of context as to the customer. So they're essentially like an NGO, and they're active in education, and basically they are supporting scholars and university students, and they have a whole program where participants apply to become beneficiaries of the foundation, and there's a whole quite intense application process. Sorry, I'm just missing something here. Can everyone still hear me okay? Because my screen's got something about recording popped up. Paul, is that normal?
We can still hear you. And
okay, because I can't see anyone else now. Okay, cool. So yeah, so there's the application process, and there's a lot of data generated around that. And then there's, once people are selected and they're in the program, it's not just a case of that the foundation supports these participants financially. They're mentored. They have to participate in an online learning program that's developed and run by the foundation. They have program officers that meet with them at regular intervals throughout the year to check on their personal well-being and any, mental health issues, emotional issues, challenges in their families. So it's a very comprehensive program that they're in. And as this all happens, there's quite a lot of data generated. And yeah, that's really the context in which we work in. And importantly, the reason we're there essentially is the overarching goal, to use what has become a cliche, is to become a data-driven organization. So they would like to use all of these reams and reams of data to help them have a better outcome in terms of their students that are participants in the program. Because, obviously it's considerable money and effort that's put into each and every student, and they want the best outcome where each of these students, or certainly as many as possible, complete their schooling, complete a university degree, and beyond that actually become entrepreneurs, because their ultimate goal is not just to produce university graduates, but to actually produce entrepreneurs who are going to make a difference in the South African economy. So those would be entrepreneurs that are people maybe working in informal employments, could even be in a corporate or any size company who have an entrepreneurial mindset, but also, and perhaps more particularly, people who are going to become entrepreneurs, perhaps in the sense that we more often think of it, that they're going to start their own companies. So that's where they're all heading, and and they want to use all of the various data that they have to help them manage and guide the participants in the program, and to that end to have a better outcome. So let me now share my screen. Everyone see that okay?
Yep.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah, it's good.
Okay. Okay, so let me just talk through this. And on the left here is essentially their main system, let's call it that, which they currently use to store all of their application, selection, and program management data for participants in the program. It's a Microsoft Dynamics 365 CRM application. That's what it's based on. So it's fully deployed in the cloud. They have no on-premises infrastructure or anything. And their in-house name for it is Athena. That's what they call it. And although it's based on Microsoft CRM, I think it's probably like, I don't know, 80–90% customized. So the actual data entities that they're using within Microsoft CRM, most of them are custom tables. So they use this. They have a whole lot of front-end screens that are used to capture applications, and program officers will capture when they have mentoring sessions with the participants. When academic results come in, they are loaded into Athena. Basically every aspect of the application selection and program participation process that I've mentioned, all that data is stored in there. And that's kind of been our starting point. In terms of data context, there are other important systems. There's a finance system, which is a SAGE system, and that's important because that's where they track actual disbursements and payments made to students and to schools. And probably the other most important one is their online learning platform, where participants go to submit assignments that are part of the entrepreneurship development program, and they get points and so on. And there is some integration from that back into Athena in terms of the points. But ultimately, they want to use not only data out of Athena, but data out of other sources like the online learning. And then the other one I haven't mentioned is a lot of the selection data around psychometric testing particularly is actually all sitting in spreadsheets. So yeah, probably not an unusual environment in having those many different data sources, but in terms of making decisions based on data and having a full view of each participant in terms of all of those aspects, they'd like to use all of that data. So we've done kind of like a whole data management exercise where we've looked at all of it and given them a sort of a roadmap as to how they can pull all of that data together and use it. There's been quite a focus on data quality in there as well. And this is where it comes down to modeling, because the main thing that we have taken as a starting point to actually build something for them to use, and which is where we're busy at the moment, is to build a data lake. We've spoken about a data warehouse, but that'll be a little bit down the road. The main purpose of the data lake is to pull the disparate data sources together, to apply some data governance to it, to apply some data quality to it, and to start to be able to get sample data sets out, some initial reports out, data quality reports, that kind of thing. And for that, we felt we didn't really need a data warehouse because this is more operational data than analytics. And we, in terms of a roadmap, have said to them, let's start with that and actually get useful data in front of people in the business. And then we can really start to see what the analytical requirements are before we go ahead and build a data warehouse. I think people who in business who maybe hear things in the data world, they will latch on to things like they've heard of a data warehouse, and that, maybe someone talking about how great it is, so that becomes the silver bullet, and they kind of think, oh, we must have a data warehouse. But we've really tried to hold it back and slow the process down and really take them on a journey with their data. So the data lake is what we felt the best structure to bring their data together and to get it together in a format that they can really start to use it. Okay, so now that's context. I hope that makes a bit of sense. So now we get down into the data, and we started to look at what is here in this Athena system. So in an early engagement with them, we did some scratching around in that. And we discovered it looks sort of like that. Okay, that was one. I didn't do this. One of my colleagues did this. We did. Let me just flip back there. Sorry. Can you guys see that slide?
Yeah, we can see the slide with the.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Just actually want to flip back to.
I think while you do that, I've got a question. I was wondering if anybody on the call actually at the moment or in the past or planning to have a similar approach where the data warehouse design is delayed with the firstly to focus on the data lake first and then to sort of grow into a data warehouse should the need arise. Is that a thing that anybody else is also dealing with? Is that a philosophy you guys share? Any comments on that?
No, I think from us, in our business, we kind of did it, I think, without us realizing it's like calling it a data lake per se. Because we also have some data from all kinds of places. And then we have a single place that then feeds into our SciSense BI tool.
Okay, so you have the BI tool looking at data structures that are not so formally designed. There's also design in it, right? But it's not a full-blown data warehouse then.
Yeah, so yeah, we have we've got our operational database, then we have all of these other databases that brings things in from various places and all of that, and then some of them are pulled into our sizing tool, and other ones are then transformed into something else. It was maybe not quite the data warehouse if I actually think about it, proper data warehouse.
Yeah, Zelda, that's actually a helpful comment because I've been thinking about this recently as well, and comparing it to where other projects I've been on, and mostly I've worked in a database, like a relational database environment. So when we're building a warehouse, files are being loaded, but the first thing is you load them into like a SQL Server or an Oracle or something like that, and you had a staging area. So, and a lot of what we currently doing in the lake, I would typically do in a, say, for example, SQL Server staging area. So my point really is reflecting on what you shared, that, sometimes the terms that we use are a little bit interchangeable or not quite pinned down, or when we get down to talking about the detail of what we're doing, it's actually the same thing.
Yeah, I'm sure you're going to get there, Colin. What was interesting for me is, in our journey of getting to this point, we almost thought we would also go into a more of a structured, like a database area, where we would basically do data lake stuff, if I can put it like that, broadly speaking, and still not go to data warehouse. And the data lake actually turned out to be a different thing altogether.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Let me carry on. If there's no other questions right now. So there were two things we did. We wanted to understand the business and the business processes and how they operated as an organization, and we kind of in parallel wanted to take a deep dive and start to see what data actually exists in this thing called Athena, so that, obviously we need to bring those two things together. So we did a lot of discussions with people, all the different parts of the organization, and we kind of used a subject area model, which is just a loose way of kind of taking everything that was mentioned in discussions that we had with people. So they would talk about applicants, they would talk about academic results, they would talk about points in the online learning program. There's institutions involved. All of these different things. So we try to just at a high level say, well, what are all the different things that are mentioned in the organization? And in this, there's no like real tight methodology to produce in the subject area model. So it's a little bit kind of somewhere floating above a proper conceptual data model. But we used it to pull together what we had heard in various discussions and then play back and present to our stakeholders at the customer and say, this is what we started to hear are important things that are coming out in discussions with people. And then on the other side, we started to scratch around in the Athena CRM database. And let me just show you, sorry, I keep going back to that one. The first thing one has to do is, because this sits in the cloud, there's actually a way to copy it out to either an on-premise or your own Azure SQL Server database, where you can actually then go and scratch around in the data. And so out of that, we just kind of, I think my colleague just sort of reverse engineered this data model. And so the Microsoft CRM system looks like that. And I'm not even going to zoom in because you just see a lot of tables, like a lot of spiders in between them, and a lot of columns, names that you don't even understand. And so my point out of this really is, how do we now start to pull these things together? How do we start to say, what are important goals in the business, and how do we find and start to understand the important data out of the source system? And that's really where the modeling has become very helpful. So let me just flip that again. So out of that, we tried to refine it down a little bit to something that looked like that. So pulling out just far fewer physical tables that we thought mapped to that. Okay, and that was a kind of a helpful thing. But then we took a step back again and started to talk about a proper conceptual data model. Now, several of us have been through the Steve Hoberman data modeling training. I don't know if that's been discussed in previous meetups with this group, but essentially he's got a pretty cool way of taking one through a conceptual data model, which is very much more business concepts, and trying to represent in something that looks a little bit like an ERD, trying to represent what's happening in the business. And then from there go into a logical data model where you're getting down more into the actual details of the data, so the actual entities and attributes, and then down to a physical implementation. So having done the training and then being at this customer, we thought, okay, let's really use this, like, let's really almost take what's happening at the customer and do it in the same way that we did exercises on the actual course. And we sort of forced our way into doing it. And it turned out to be really helpful. And let me talk you through it, because hopefully it shares really what I'm trying to share, is how we've used modeling to kind of find our way through, you know, from that, which is just like a complete mess, and start to get something useful out. So the first thing here was that we focused on an area of the business, an area of the organization, which is the actual program management. So we weren't looking at the application process. Okay, we did kind of start with that, but in this particular conceptual model, we skipped over that, and we said, what are the actual components that are part of this process, that are concepts here? So the key one is, they used to call it a beneficiary. That's a scholar or a student in the program. They now actually call them participants. So that's absolutely key. It's a people business, and those are the people that are kind of like what your organization is all about. And those participants participate in a program, and the program is they're either at school or at university. They are part of the foundations program where they get mentored, and there's online learning and so on and so on. And they can be in the program for multiple years. I mean, hopefully they are, because high school is 5 years and university is 3 or 4 or however many years. So that's an important concept, and there's a relationship there. Within the organization, the participants have consultations, and those are conducted by the program officer. And out of those consultations, the program officers generate reports. What we perhaps should have added here is there's a renewal process. So every year, to proceed or remain in the program for the following year, there's a renewal process where they look at the reports and academic results, as well as what's been done in the online learning, and that generates a renewal process, and then they stay in the program for another year. And then obviously the other key concept here is the institution that they're at, the school or the university. So that looked, when we did it, and I actually sat down and I did this with one of our key managers at the customer. And so there was kind of business buy-in to say that this does represent what we're doing. And when we had sat down and done this and looked at it, we thought, gosh, that looks like way too simple. You know, bear in mind, we come in from that, and we whittling it down to that. And so we had to really think about that and go, is this real? Does this accurately represent the management of the scholarship and the fellowship program? Let me just clarify there. Scholarship is what they call scholars, people in school, tertiary education. Fellowship is their sort of department, their part of the organization that deals with university students. So the conclusion of reviewing this was that, yes, actually, it's not a complicated business, what they're doing. And when you boil it down to the key aspects, this conceptual model turned out to be a nice, clear starting point for us, which then meant that we could go and really say, what data do we really need to start to produce reports and give insights to these business processes? Okay, let me just pause for 1 sec to see what I want to show you next. Yeah, okay, so I'm not going to show it to you, but from this, we did develop a logical model. And I won't show it to you because I'm going to show you the actual physical model in a sec. But what happened at this point was I kind of digressed. So I'm the key resource on the project. I'm doing the data modeling. I'm also building the ETL and, as it happens, also building reports. So out of this, I started to build ETL so essentially this process here to start to populate the data lake. And then as we started to get data in there, to start to get out data set samples or report samples that we've actually started to put in front of key people in the business. But as I did that, I realized that that's where it gets messy, and that's where things unravel a little bit. So you can have this nice, neat theory. You start with a conceptual data model. You make it really focused, as we've done here. Then you build out a logical model, and you say, what are you define in the data entities that you need, and you go down to a level of attribute detail. And then you go to your source system, and you start to build the ETL so you actually can populate a physical model. But then there's all these little feedback loops, because you look in, you build an ETL and you're putting it together and it doesn't quite work. So you go back and you scratch around with the data, and basically your nice, neat model starts to turn out not so nice and neat. And then of course there's time pressure. So you maybe abandon the sort of modeling approach a little bit and just do what us developers always do, where you just start flipping building ETL and building reports. Feel free for anyone to chirp in right now and say, yes, they've been to that party and they understand what I'm talking about.
I've never been there, Colin, I just want to say.
Yeah, but you're special, Paul. And you've missed out on a lot of fun.
Yeah, we're all been there.
Okay.
Well,
so
while you switch there, I just want to sort of make a comment on, when I saw this diagram for the first time, I was almost kind of like, yeah, is this really how much you could simplify the whole concept from where we started of all those many tables? And obviously this doesn't represent the whole business, but the whole approach with using a conceptual model like this was very helpful for me, because I know some of these terms. I've been working on the account for a while. But to just ring fence the pieces of data that's actually necessary for your focus area, this is a very easy and simple model to help people understand what you're actually busy with. It's a very easy way to just give that communication over. And I remember the senior management of AGOF had a similar sort of reaction. So that was really great.
Yeah, I've said that it is deceptively simple, but what it's been useful for is really to revisit. So when you start to get down into the messy detail of the data and you sort of lose your perspective, and you pop your head above the parapet and you look at this thing again and you go, okay, that really helps us to clarify that we're on the right track. I just want to take a step back. So I want to start to show you in Power BI the more of a physical instantiation of the data. But I want to just take a quick step back in the process that we went through in terms of developing this conceptual model, because this deceptively simple one was not the first one that I did. I think it's that one. I hope it's that one. Yeah. Okay, there were a couple of versions of this, but this was more of a conceptual model that I started with. And the main mistake that we made here, because we did this and then we had some playback around this with the key people in the customer, and we sort of realized it's not actually right. And the mistake that I made was to not step away from the Microsoft CRM, the Athena application. I was too much digging around in the application and almost looking at the business through the lens of the application to understand how the business works. And that was a mistake because the data structure within that CRM application does not actually really map very, very well to the actual business processes. So when you're trying to understand the business by looking at it through that actual application, you get a distorted view. And even the way this model is laid out is this concept here called application actually looks like the sort of central entity, and it's actually not. The participant in the program is the central entity. So an application is about applicants, and applicants, if they're selected, become participants. But this doesn't accurately represent how the business runs. So I kind of scrapped it. I just chucked it, and we went back to the one that I showed you, which I think was that one.
Colin, would be nice also if you just the camera settings. Can you just explain what those mean, where that comes from?
Yeah, so that is a very helpful thing. And again, I don't know if you've discussed it in this group before, but that comes out of Steve Hogerman's course, where when you sit in with the data model, there's sort of qualities or characteristics of your data model that are very, very useful to decide beforehand because they sort of determine the parameters of what you're modeling. And he uses this analogy of a camera to do that. So that's where the term camera settings comes from. So he's saying when you're taking a photograph on a camera, there's a zoom, and the zoom is how close up are you looking, or how far away is your picture? Are you zooming in or out? And the main choice there is this model about a particular project or about a wider program or the whole business? So we decided in this case to call it project because it's not the whole business. We're focusing on particular business processes. So that's the zoom. The next setting is, I think he calls it focus. What is the focus? Is it concrete or abstract? Those are the main things. So how sharp or fuzzy do you want your picture to be? And if it's abstract, you're using generic terms, like most of us will know about a party model and a party role model. And in this case, we could abstract the program participants and just have a party concept or entity. But we decided to be more concrete and use the terms that they're using in the business, which is beneficiary, and they've now changed that to participant. The third, there's 5. The third is the timer. So is this a model about something that's currently in place or to be? So in this instance, we said to be, although the business processes it's representing are actually in place, we called it to be because we're modeling it for the purposes of building something that's not currently in place. It's to be. Paul West Howard, so he can explain his as is to be idea, as I can't explain that.
Yeah, or a metaphysical model.
No, let's not go there. Okay, so then the fourth one is the filter. So on a camera, you might put a filter on to sort of change the colors or give a particular effect. So the filter here is, are we talking about business terminology or are we talking about application terminology? So in our model, what terminology are we going to use? And we went with business because we wanted to really align this closely to when people in the organization are talking, what words do they actually use? Do they talk about a consultation, or do we or do we use a term that's used in the application? Maybe the consultation is called something else in there. So we definitely wanted it to be business terminology. And then the last one is essentially the mode of the model, or the mode. How do you describe mode? It's essentially around the data. Is it relational or is it dimensional? So if you are modeling for a data warehouse, it's going to be dimensional, but in our instance, it's relational because it's just entities that are related to each other. We're not rolling them up into a Kimball star schema dimensional kind of vibe. Yeah. So those are very useful things to, and we try and actually put them here into our model to remind us what are the parameters of this model. And then I also popped in some of the business questions that we're trying to answer with modeling this conceptual model. So what's coming out of what the business people are saying to us that they want to see. So in our case, they were saying managers can, the Athena application has got some front ends that they can go and look at details, they can look at some dashboard type reports, but they don't have the ability to look at summary and drill down into detail, and they kind of want that both for analysis. Yeah, I'll be very honest, this is a bit cryptic. I can't remember all the things that we put in there. But it's useful to have these kind of notes in your model to remind you what it is that you're actually modeling. Okay, so maybe take a mental picture of that, and then I'm going to flip to Power BI. And let me just do a check in here. Are people familiar with Power BI and how it works and what it is? Yes, no?
I've played a little bit with it, but not much.
Yeah, okay, so quick intro. It's Microsoft's reporting tool. I'm by no means an expert. It's actually, this is the first project I'm using it. I've used other reporting tools. But what's pertinent here is, as with most reporting tools, the first thing you do is you go and connect it to a data source, and you bring data in, and then you can make tables and graphs and all of that kind of thing. What you do in Power BI, and if you've worked with business objects, for example, and I think Oracle has a similar layer, in business objects you have the universe where you go and kind of like define your data structures, and you set up the joins between entities or tables so that when you pull in data into a table or graph, it's able to relate. So here in Power BI, they have they actually call it a data model. And so what I wanted to say, this is now more like, this is actually a physical data model. So the other data model I showed you, this was in Visual Paradigm that we use for our data modeling. Just now I can show you the actual physical data model that I've done in Visual Paradigm, but hopefully it's going to align very, very closely to to this representation that you see in Power BI. So something like beneficiary, remember they now call a participant. Here's the participant in the Power BI model. This particular report is also bringing in, it's gone wider. So we've gone wider than this original conceptual model, but maybe let me just highlight what we do have in here. Institution, academic results. So here's my institution. Here's your institution. Down here you have academic results. Here's your program table. Okay, that's split out with your program reports. Okay, which is this entity sitting over here in your conceptual data model. Yeah, so piece by piece, I did the queries, I did the ETL to bring these different entities into our data lake. Okay, so in the data lake, each of these things is literally just a file. So I've got a participant file, I've got a program file, I've got academic results file, and in the lake we bring it into a raw layer, and then we do a minimal transformation where we just kind of renaming columns so that they've got more of business names. And if there's sort of lookups, like for example, in the application level, your years are stored as codes, but we don't want to see codes. So we go do a quick lookup in the ETL and into the curated, that's what we call it, layer of the lake. We've already done all those lookups. So when I go to the data lake and I pull up the participant file, I don't know if if you can see, you've got column names or attribute names that are business use ready. So academic years, country dialing code, email address, etc., etc. Whereas in the application layer, those things are going to be called something underscore something, and it's not, business friendly usage. So the idea in the lake is that although it's not a data warehouse, that a reporting tool or some other consuming application or user who wants to go and do some research is able to pull up a bunch of files. If they're using something like Power BI, they can join them together and then they can start to build presentations for business reporting. I don't want to show you too many really of the presentations here because then we're starting to get into the actual data about people, and that's, I guess, confidential for the organization. So I'm going to keep it at this sort of level here. But I guess the point really of this whole story, if there is one, is that we started with this, which is just unmanageable. We started with this, which is really quite loose. And we really needed to get down to something like this, where we could start to give useful data to the business in a way that they want to see it. And the way that we got from that big mess down to something a lot more specific, because I think you'll agree that if you look at this, it's even if you don't know exactly what's going on here, it really just looks a bit more manageable, doesn't it? Because you've got things that are clearly named, that the relationships between them are defined. You can look in there, it's nice, English that you can understand, and it just feels a lot more usable. So how did we do that? We went from the mess down to this much more focused point, really by using the modeling methodology. And I think that's really my story today. I'll share a couple more other complexities that we had along the way, but for me, that was the revelation. Where in a lot of other projects, it's just been a case of diving into the messy detail of the data and trying to, swim, not sink, and eventually finding a way out of it. And what we've done here is we've applied a modern technology, and it's really paid off for us in starting to deliver something that we can then expand on and eventually cover the full scope of what the customer's wanting. I think let me pause there just to see if anyone has questions, and then I can maybe share a couple of other detailed things that we've learned along the way.
Maybe one question. You just said that it was for you a very positive experience to not start from the technical point of view, from the applications, but start from the business point of view, the business concepts. Like basically every author in the field ever for the past decades has preached to start from the business, but for some reason nobody does this, yes, even though the benefits are obvious and everybody yes, tells you to do it, yes, but still nobody does it. Can you have an idea why this happens?
Christian, no. If anyone has an idea, I'd love to know. I mean, I really have become, I guess not only on this project and other projects too, really very convinced of the notion that we should spend more time analyzing. So very often, it's like 10% of the time is spent analyzing, and 90% of the time is spent developing and testing and redeveloping and sitting in meetings, people arguing about why the project's running late. And I mean, we all know that story. And I think the proportion is way wrong. We should spend 50% of our time analyzing. And that's business analysts analysis and data analysis, because this modeling methodology of going from conceptual to logical to physical actually cuts across those disciplines of business analysis and data analysis. And then you have such a clear idea at the end of that, if you really engage in that, that your development time, is like halved, because you're really clear about what you want, and you don't waste time renaming columns afterwards or not understanding what you've seen in the data. So I'm fully convinced of the benefits of it. Why businesses do it less, I don't know, to be honest. A lot of my experience has been more in corporate organizations, and I think it's just often about lack of vision being aligned, and people sitting in their silos and each trying to pursue their own agenda. I'm not sure. The one really cool thing, last thought, the one really, really cool thing about this particular customer is in their journey as an organization, they have been at a point where they don't have a lot of stuff. They don't have a lot of systems. They don't have a lot of legacy. They've never had a data warehouse. So that they're really kind of coming in fresh. And it's been an ideal opportunity for us to, I'm going to use the word do things properly, but to do things in this kind of progressive way where we step in from one thing to the next. And they've really bought into it. And we've developed a relationship of trust where they're able to actually say, yes, that is the right way to go. And we're going to slow down what everyone's trying to get to make sure that we build the foundation correctly and that we build it well.
I think that's what I have found with software development projects that I've worked on is, unfortunately, reporting is always given, the least amount of time. It's like an off. And the other thing is also when you try and get out of users, it's actually difficult because they don't know what they want.
Exactly.
I find it a big challenge. I mean, we also we were going to implement Dynamics last year, and they understood what they wanted out of the process and the workflow, but when you get to the reports, it was like, don't know.
Yeah, no, exactly. And that's my feeling about a data warehouse, is you really need to understand what you want to analyze before you go and build the data warehouse. So, I mean, I've been to that party where you're on a project and you're building a data warehouse, and then you start to build reports and the users go, that's not what we want. And then you've discovered you've got to go and change a whole lot of fact tables. So our contention, and we go back to this picture, is that to get to a point of a data lake, because it's not a warehouse, and you're basically bringing in separate entities that are relational, as I've showed you in the Power BI model, and you can get to this point, depending on the actual scope of the data, but we've sort of kept it limited to start with. You can get to this point relatively quickly. And then once you're here, and just by the way, we build in this data lake, everything's in Azure, and Power BI, it's all the Microsoft world, so Power BI plugs into that quite easily. And once you've got files in there, you can relatively quickly start to pull these files into a Power BI model like this and start to actually give sample reports to users. And the whole idea that we use in here is that when you show them something, there's a feedback loop. And then they go, yes, I like that, or no, that's not useful, or I'd rather see it this way, or you need to bring in more detail. And then we just, we go, we iterate. We start to bring more stuff in and add it and start to get it out. And once you've done that enough times, and the users are much more familiar with their data and what they want to get out of it, now you can start to really articulate what are the analytical requirements for which a warehouse would be useful.
I just have a stupid question.
No, stupid questions.
Is there a difference between a data lake and an ODS?
That's, I think, a great question. Paul, as they say in Afrikaans, ja nee,
Yeah, I think any good answer starts with ja nee,
Yeah, no. Zintle, I think there may be similarities. So, okay, it's really about defining it in the context in which you're doing it, and understanding the business requirements that you're trying to deliver through it. So traditionally an ODS is what's the right word, Jay? It's limited time period data.
Yeah.
You're not necessarily keeping history. So the actual physical data model of your ODS might look very, very similar to what we've got in the data lake.
Okay.
But what, in addition, so where it might differ a little bit, if your ODS is that kind of more traditional definition, is that we build enough history in the lake.
Okay.
So yes, so the short answer is yes, very similar, but also maybe not. It depends really what you're trying to achieve.
Okay. So I pretty much wear a business analyst hat most of the time. So we're now in a place where we have to start doing a bit of data analyst, because everyone in the business has all of these ideas about what they want to build, what they want to get out of analytics and all of that. So they've sort of gotten to a data lake stage where we are able to now start processing files into a data lake, which the assumption that we made sitting in the business analyst space was that we're now in some sort of staging environment, and then we might still need to further down the line build an ODS where most of the real-time reporting will be happening from.
I think all I can say that may be helpful is to reiterate the modeling approach. So whether it's a data lake, a staging area, or an ODS, have a model, have a conceptual model, and preferably also have a logical and maybe a physical model as well, because that's what helps. It does help you keep your perspective and remind you of why you build in that particular data structure.
Okay.
Something maybe I could add is, in the lake, Colin, the different layers like the raw and the curated and so on. So that's quite a big differentiator, I think, from a typical ODS, right? So I don't think you've expanded much on that.
Yes,
that
maybe
will also help the answer.
Yeah, let me do that. So the corny thing, that people say is don't let your data lake become a data swamp, right? And that, a data lake is, I really battle sometimes with all the different terminology that we use in IT and in the data world, because it comes and goes. But it's essentially a repository of data. And what makes it useful is, I think, that it's structured and that the structure is suited to what you're trying to do. If it's just, for example, you see those people at work who put every single file they get, they just put it on their desktop, right? So they don't have a My Documents and then a set of folders and whatever, where they neatly keep stuff. How do you ever find stuff? So if your data lake has no structure and you're just chucking stuff in there, to be really simple about it, it's not really going to be a useful repository of data, because its use is that you put it in and you can also get it out. And that if you have something you're trying to achieve, a requirement for which you need data, that it's quick and easy to go and find that data in your data lake. So I think the structure is key, and that structure should map to your actual requirement of what you're trying to do. So at a high level, we had an idea of 3 high-level layers, and whatever fell under those layers would be more mapped to the business. So the high-level layers are raw, curated, and cleansed. Now, I'm just going to talk about the first 2 because we haven't really got to the cleansed yet. So the raw is typically where I've done it in a database environment rather than a data lake environment. Your raw would be your landing area or your staging area, where you're simply bringing in your source data. So if this is our source here, Athena, we're bringing in basically every table in the Athena database is a file, and we land it in the raw level of the lake, and there's absolutely no transformation. There's just consistent naming, but there's no filtering, there's no renaming of columns, there's no joining, there's nothing. Okay, that's basically getting the data into our domain where we can actually use it. And then out of that raw level, and let me just say that there is some structure within the raw level, particularly in terms of source systems and timing. So at the moment, we've only got the one source system, but if our actual folder structure does not allow us to distinguish between source systems, then we're going to have a problem when we want to use the data and start to integrate the data from different source systems. And then the second thing is time. So if we're doing a daily extract, okay, we're doing more like a monthly or weekly at this stage. So we'll have year and month folders, and then each extract will go in accordingly. So if you need to take the latest, you can do a quick calculation of what is the latest month, and you can dynamically derive the folder and whatever code it is you're using to build that up. But the point is the structure allows you to do that. Or if you want to go a year back and compare data from a year ago, the same data, the same source system, it's the structure that you've got in that raw level of the lake that allows you to easily go and meet that requirement.
Okay.
Yeah. And then from there, as I mentioned earlier, we have a curated level. So what I'm doing is flip back to my Power BI model. These data entities in this Power BI model are each a curated file in the data lake. So what I'm doing with the participant file is I'm renaming columns. Let me just see if I can find an actual example in here. It's not going to show you a minute through. So in the raw, there'll be a whole lot of ID fields. And then I have to go and do a lookup to actually return academic year instead of a code, or a country name instead of a country code. So in the raw data, it'll just be like a country code, but I actually want to do a lookup and bring back the name so that the file, as it sits in the curated level of the lake, is business ready. It's not necessarily related yet to other entities. That's what we're doing here inside Power BI, but it's business ready in the sense that things are neatly named, and I don't have to go and do a whole lot of lookups just to translate codes. There might be other things you would do in a different situation to bring it into a curated level, but the overall point really is that the curated level is more business focused.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Colin.
Sure. Paul, I think we're about at the end of our time, and
you have more things to say?
I'm pretty much done.
Oh, are you? Okay.
I've used up all my words.
Well, your wife is going to be angry with me then.
She is, and I'm going to tell her it's your fault.
I know, it's just one more thing.
Yep.
Okay, so that was a great talk. Any further questions from anybody in the audience? Are you agreeing with this sort of approach? Anything to share? Anything to critique, perhaps?
Sorry, can I get the specific? It's Marty speaking. Can I get the specific name of the data model training course that you mentioned?
Yes, Marty. It's I can maybe answer that. It's. Are you residing? Where in the world are you at the moment?
I'm in Johannesburg. Recently, just moved here from Harare.
Okay, so we run the course both in Cape Town and in Joburg and internationally. In South Africa, we are working, when I'm saying we, I work for Altron, Colin and I work for Altron, and Howard runs his own consultancy called Modelware. We are partnering and we present the course locally here. So in Joburg, the course, or in South Africa, the course is named How to Do Data Modeling, but it's also known as the Data Modeling Master Class, which is the name that Steve Oberman uses when he teaches it. It's exactly the same one. We've been certified to do that, and thanks for bringing up the question, because I was meaning to actually say in the top of the presentation that we will be running a course in Cape Town on the 14th, between the 14th and the 17th of Jan, and in Joburg. I must just look up the dates for you. But you can actually go look at the whole course is published, the dates for Johannesburg for the year, by Velisa Africa. I'll maybe just add it to the chat box. In Johannesburg, that's the facilities that they use where the course is presented. But the course is presented by, in Joburg, it's presented by Howard himself. I am going to type that quickly into the chat box. So it's for Lisa Africa. The course is, it's a 4-day course, and it costs 12,000 Rand for the 4 days per person. And it includes 3 days of running the course. It is, it contains a lot of practical sort of little exercises that you do either alone or in a group. And it takes you through all the phases, the conceptual, the logical, and the physical modeling. And then the 4th day is sort of a case study that the people sort of work through, and it's a lot of fun. And we just found that course is a great way to get over the idea that data modeling is only for designing databases. I think that's the biggest revelation for me, and I think the biggest disservice for modeling is when you only see it as designing a database. So as Colin has done, using the conceptual model and then to logical and physical takes you through the whole process of actual requirements analysis and requirements refinement. And at the end of that period, if you use a modeling for that, you're in a much better position than you would have been if it was just a business analyst giving you a spec and a functional spec and this or that. You cut through a lot of noise if you just sort of work through the data model with the business and translate their ideas into more concrete concepts. Yeah, so the next course runs in Jan. I think it's a little bit later in Jan in Joburg, in Cape Town, from the 14th to the 17th of Jan.
Okay, thanks. Is there any way I can get your contact? Just...
Yes, sure. You can in the meetup. You'll find our contact details, but I will just type my own contact details here in the chat box. You can email me here, and I'll point you to the right place in Joburg. I'll point you to Howard.
Thanks.
Great. Yeah, so anybody in Cape Town that wants to join us for that course, there are still a few places open. It's a nice way to kick off the new year. It's before everybody really comes back from leave, so things are still slowish. It would be great to see you. Any other questions, comments? All right, then I think, Colin, thanks a lot for your prep and for the talk. And I hope you find some words to say to Cheryl tonight. Just try something nice and sweet, and so she's not angry with me. But thanks so much for your for sharing your journey there, and looking forward to the next meetup. This meetup is every first Monday of the month. I'm actually not sure if we'll have one in Jan. Just keep an eye up on the meetup page. You'll get the notifications if there is going to be one. We'll schedule it. But with that, I think thanks everybody for attending, and have a great evening further. And see you soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, guys.
Cheers.
Thanks, Colin.
Cool.
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, Craigster. Let me just stop the recording here.
Colin did well.
Yeah. Hang on, let me just stop recording. Where do I do that? Here.